Dash Reimer. Him is a spoken word poet and hip hop artist. He has a decade of experience performing on stages across Canada, Africa, and Turkey, notably being Canada's Youth Spoken Word Champion in 2012. Dash's forthcoming first book of poetry, Poems About Nothing, will hopefully be coming out in late 2022. We know how all these schedules change because of our good old pandemic over here. Dash is passionate about community building and collaboration, having been a co-director of Write Out Loud for many years, as well as an avid collaborator in playwriting, jazz combos, improv troupes, rap groups, and everything in between. He loves baking, biking, and making you feel some type of way. So please welcome Dash Reimer to share some of his work with us now.
Thank you very much, Danielle, and thank you so much, Michael, for sharing those words. That was sweet to kind of hear a really vivid painting of this community and these mechanics in it. So like Danielle was saying, my name's Dash. Today I'm going to be doing some spoken word. In case you don't know what spoken word is, it's just the art form of taking a poem, kind of ripping it off the page and making it a performance. It's an art form that's rooted really beautifully across the world in different indigenous and African cultures, different cultures around the world. I'm coming here as a third generation immigrant, Mennonite and Irish, so I'm a guest in this genre of art, and I'm really grateful to be here sharing some of it with you. So I have this manuscript I've been writing, working with a publisher on, called Poems About Nothing. Working title for right now is I've been thinking a lot about the idea of nothing and absence and how we kind of fill space. And I always thought it was kind of funny for me to think about these things because anybody that knows me knows I'm real loud, I'm real big, I have a very large wingspan, I wave my arms a lot. Oftentimes when I was going to the U of S, people would hear me before they would hear of me. And so I thought it was interesting to try and write about this because when I say that I'm loud, like, believe me, I could fit a whole brass section in the space between my lungs. I ask questions like a hammer and stammer only when manners necessitate such a desperate state from my tongue. There are echoes in my chest aching to share themselves with anyone in earshot. I hear lots and speak more. I restore my moxie with saucy banter and answer, even when I'm asked no questions. It's my fatal flaw. Because I've come to realize that I am at my loudest when I'm trying to cover something up, like rambling, like humming, like stumbling over words, like screaming to the sirens. I think I'm afraid of silence. So when I say that I am loud, what I'm trying to say is that I am afraid. Because my fears are loud. Heartbeat in your eardrums loud, car accident loud, the night before the divorce loud. My fears are shapeshifters. They make every stranger's face look one step away from gutting me. My fears are brash and full of bravado. My fears talk with their hands and fists. My fears talk down to me like they are one step above, like they know better, but I know I should know better, but I don't know how to be better when the only voice inside my head is screaming, run. Maybe you won't mess up if you run, so I feel my legs turning numb, sprinting with sprained ankle severity. My fears make me afraid of myself. When I realize it is not the world doing this to me, it is me doing this to everyone else. And I know I could shout the chorus of whom shall I fear into the dark alleyway, but that wouldn't make the shadows disappear. That would just make me more loud. And I know I could sing to the hurricane, and that would be poetic as hell. But it would do nothing to take this cold hand off of my chest. It would do nothing to give back all of the love that I missed out on while my mind was spinning conspiracies and shrieking Bloody Marys into every funhouse mirror I measure the world by. I've been told that noise is just another way that we lie to the grief that sits inside of our silence, and I am so tired of screaming out my sorrow. So this is not the time to be bold. This is the time to draw myself together. This is not the time to be courageous and loud. This is the time to stumble into humility, to look like a fool sitting in silence, smiling. And so I wrote this piece not long after I got to Tunisia. So I grew up in North Africa, and I returned to Tunisia specifically as an adult. And I remember getting there coming from, I know Saskatoon's a city, but sometimes it feels like a small city, a very quiet city. And I moved to this massive city where there was always noise, there was always something going on. And I remember feeling like the buzz of it made me feel just like afraid and anxious. But eventually it started settling into normalcy. And that became kind of what was the beautiful symphony around me. And I came back to Saskatoon right before the pandemic started. And I just remember I moved in this house. There's this 2-story tree house in the backyard. I don't really know who built it or why. One of the previous tenants used to go in there and get up to some dubious things, so my other roommates stayed out of there. But I picked up one ladder, I put it up to it, so I climbed up to the second level, and I carried a second ladder with me up to the second level. I put it on there, and I went up to the roof. And we all know, if you're in Saskatoon in a residential area, if you're 2 stories up, you're taller than anything else around. And I just remember writing that night, "Tonight I climb a ladder to the balcony of the 2-story treehouse in this rental property's backyard. I crawl onto the roof, all ungracious-like, and light up my cigarette. The smoke smells like tradition, like clearing my head by filling my lungs and standing on rooftops. And tonight, from this roof, I look over the city, but it all feels wrong. Saskatoon does not scream back at me like Tunis. Saskatoon whispers with rustling chains and well-oiled bikes. I swear I can hear a patio door open 2 blocks away. Tunis makes a symphony out of the noise pollution. The sky is always orange at night, and every household rumbles with euphony. Saskatoon sounds like loss. The prairies feel empty. The sky is asleep. But somewhere in this river city, life is happening, softly, sweetly, silent enough that I can't hear it from this 2-story treehouse." And so I wrote that kind of processing the way that sometimes when we move into new spaces, we see things as empty when they really aren't. You can look at the history of this country and see that reflected there. And when I move into spaces, it's hard for me sometimes to really see what already fills it and what already exists there. And one thing when I moved into the neighborhood that I live in now, I live just a few blocks north of St. Paul's, and I work a lot in the schools around the area. And recently, I know one of the big themes that we've been talking a lot about is resiliency, which is important and vital and beautiful when we get to see that in play and in action. And I remember this was largely inspired by, I believe it was a friend of mine posting on Facebook, Betty Poapskonius, just talking about how, yeah, resiliency is good, but how beautiful would it be if we didn't live in a place where that was demanded of people? And so I wrote this for some of the students that I work with. It's called How to Be Ungrateful. My students have tried to eat gratitude, to swallow mouthfuls of patience and positive visualizations, but it is hard to eat affirmations without choking on the bones of all of your relatives that could not overcome trauma with inspiration. We teach them to untie bootstraps and turn them into tourniquets, bow knots and steady hands, whispering into the hemorrhages, sweet, sweet nothings that rot at the bone. And a few of my students will be let through eventually, to be praised for their resiliency, to become an excuse so that us teachers can retreat to the remainder and return to the work of feeding students whose arms and hands are tied behind their back without any question of who knotted the binds that keep them from feeding themselves in the first place. Sometimes I see our schools as a kind of ocean, and the ocean demands resiliency of the rocks on the shore. The rocks, they don't know anything other than steadfast. They speak with anchor-heavy hope that one day the ocean will not be so cruel to them, that one day the seemingly soft shoulder of slow-tide waves will not erode day after day. My students, they remind me of the rocks on that shore, the strength of soil. The waves break on them and they do not move, but they are still slowly changed. And it is easy for us teachers to hope for a day when our ocean turns lavender soft, water to a dry rock instead of erosion to a resilient soul. It is easy for us teachers to believe that our students have more to offer us. It is harder for us to accept that sometimes we are a part of that ocean that has broken itself over and over again, over the histories of trauma, over the minds that could not fit in, over the rocks on the shore. Sometimes I wonder what the point is of developing a resiliency to a broken system. Some days I wonder if the ocean is able to let the moon pull itself back out into low tide tenderness and gentle touch, softly misting onto all of the rocks and moss and lichen and new life growing on the shore in its wake. And I think that just kind of ended talking and processing a lot about what that role looks like sometimes in absence. Absence sometimes is good spaces for growth. And I think another area where I talk a lot about in the manuscript that I'm writing is sometimes the way that we use absence and nothing inside of ourselves as a tool and a weapon to survive. Sometimes resiliency or surviving looks like us kind of hollowing ourselves out. And I think especially as a man sometimes, I've used that tactic to kind of let pain hollow me a bit in order to keep going, but then not knowing how to interact with others in that space. And so I wanted to write this poem as well about this dream I keep having, where I am a jackal at the foot of your bed. I am hungry, I mean angry, I mean afraid, that my jagged is peeking through my shoulder blades. I'm catching my breath on loose nails, ragged gasps. I've got a cough, something fierce. I've got worms in my windpipe. Every time my bones play cat's cradle with my nerves twisting together, this chronic pain body at its worst. I get bitter and call it overflow. I write you poems and call it penance. I feel pain and call it exactly what it is. A rotting house at the end of the cul-de-sac is a den for jackals, and I tell you that I'm afraid for you. But the truth is that my fears are less about you and more about me. Everyone's guilty secret is that we want to be the jackal at our lover's door because there's power there. There's a surprising amount of control that men gain from losing control, and so I don't. Instead, take off the jackal's coat, step out the door, and return to dust, remembering that there was a time where the happy poems felt just as important as the sad ones, and that thought makes me smile just enough to show my teeth. And I wrote that just because I deal with a lot of chronic health issues. And sometimes when you feel it for so long, you don't know what to do with all of it. And finding healthy ways to cope through that is really difficult. And I don't have a ton of time left. I might do just probably one more short piece to end things off. I wrote this because I realized I have a really hard time writing about people that I know and love. I love disembodying myself from myself and writing about big ideas from a far ways away, but it's harder for me to just sit in front of someone and tell them that I love them. So I wrote this for my mom on Mother's Day a while ago, and I was like, you know what, this is good enough. I'm gonna keep this. It wasn't just a cheesy little poem for a card. I was like, this is nice. And so I wanted to do this. I've been doing this a lot, and she's heard me do it from the audience, and it's funny. I remember when I performed it, I'd given it to her and let her read it. Then when she first heard me perform it, she's like, Joel, why did you embellish so much from the original one? Why did you make it sound so much nicer? And I remember hearing that and be like, oh, I didn't change it at all. It just sometimes feels a lot sweeter when you actually hear someone say it to you. And so I've been enjoying doing this one. This is about my mother. Every year, my mother buys a Kinsman Home Lottery ticket. And at $100 a ticket, she always tells us it is the one thing that she buys for herself, and she's not exactly wrong. It must tickle her Anabaptist Mennonite roots to tangle charity and gambling together like that, and I am always grateful for the tensions she holds. She turns house tours into houseboats for bad days. She always knows exactly how she'll divide her dream home. This room is for guests. This room is for Joel to record in. This will be a reading room for Greg. This is for the family. My mother is content like a saint, meaning she desires more than she receives. She just knows that what is already in her hands is worth more than what is outside of them. For someone who has never gotten to live in one place for very long, my mother knows home better than most. She's a homemaker in the best sense of the word. She will turn penny pinch paydays into pizza Fridays. She will find a way to beautify our asbestos-filled cardboard walls. She will ration the Christmas baking so that our stomachs are always sweet, but never greedy. My mother is a desert gardener. Her voice is as big as mine. One day I want to make a home like her. So I bake gingerbread men every December and cram as many loved ones as I can in my tiny one-bedroom suite. Neither of us have won the lottery yet, but we both still hold home in our two hands and watch it overflow into everything outside of them. Thank you very much for listening. Those are my poems for today.
Thank you so much for sharing your words with us, Dash. That was wonderful.
Great.
And again, thank you, Michael. I couldn't help but notice as we were listening to both of your works, so many similarities, even though we're working in different genres and different ways of being. Before I dig into my own questions, of which I have several, I just want to remind all of you who are watching live on YouTube to please comment, send your questions in. They'll be passed to me, and I can make sure that the authors can answer and address any of your questions. I know we've covered a wide breadth of topics already in our panel here, and I can't wait to dig into some more. So, yes, okay. Let's start maybe with world building, because that's something that I see that both of you are masters at. Creating this visual world, especially like hearing it out loud as your audience member today, listening to you reading and sharing your words with us. What are your strategies for world building? Is it something that exists in your mind audibly first before it goes on paper? Is there strategy of writing notes and it slowly comes together? Would love to just hear about your process for each of you and how you create the worlds that you present in your writing.
Yeah, if I can start, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. I would say for me, as I grew older and the more I wrote, I kind of give the credit for most of my writing to my laptop. Because I usually would start like without, unlike other writers I know or friends who write, I don't have an outline. Sometimes I'd have a title, and I just, you know what, the title is on my, I open a Word document or whatever, and I put the title there, and I just let it marinate for months. And I keep hearing that title in my head. And then I go back and I start writing. And from chapter to chapter, the story takes like a life of its own. Like I've never planned a book and it turned out the way I wanted. There's from chapter to chapter, characters keep springing up from nowhere. And like, I don't know who these people are. They just show up on my laptop. And I carry them in my head everywhere I go. But in terms of building the words and the characters, I think I'm greatly influenced by people and just imagining what people are like. So I wouldn't just go into a bank and I was served by a teller and I'll walk away. Like while they're, counting my money or doing whatever, like I'm thinking, okay, did she just get a report that she was pregnant or something?
There's always backstory.
Yeah, there's like I'm always like, okay,
yeah.
while we're having this conversation, what's your name, your PIN, whatever, I'm thinking, okay, did she just buy a bicycle for her son? Like I'm thinking all these thoughts in my head, and that's what becomes my story. So I'm able to just look at somebody, like I'm walking from on 23rd Street or wherever, and I see people walking across from me. If it was a family, I'm thinking, okay, what does this daughter just do, And I try to imagine their lives, and that becomes part of like my own content. And that would be where most of the inspiration, for my writing would come from. And I'm really fascinated by like everyday things and everyday people. And so people will read what I write and, remark how relatable it is, because I feel like, those are the stories that resonate a lot more. And yeah, all the fancy stuff, like I wish I could do that. When I grow older, I'd like to write for Marvel or something. But for now, I'm content just writing about everyday people and their struggles and whatever it was, writing their final exams, worried whether they would get admitted into U of S, and just the everyday things that people worry about.
The magic in everyday life. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Dash, you want to share with us about your world building and how that works for you?
Yeah, it was sweet hearing Michael's response too before, because I think between our two different genres, I think it's so different. I have a lot of respect for people that write novels. As a child, my parents would have us do like creative writing exercises, and so I would try and write novels, and I would get so stuck in the world building. I would spend forever with a document of all the characters and the types of magic and all the ways and all the enemies and the different kinds of enemies. And I would never actually wrote anything, but I would come up with beautiful worlds. No one could ever see them though, but I just didn't have the patience and I think the ability to sit in them for long enough. So I love when people can write novels and invite someone into that. I think now that I write a lot of spoken word and poetry, it's interesting because the majority of my work, almost all of it, is going to be autobiographical. So I'm not trying to invite someone into another person's perspective, like another character's perspective within this book, which I find so hard to kind of do that, like what you're talking about, where you see someone and you're just like, what's going on in their head? And because I only really have to invite people into my kind of perspective on what I'm writing about, I like to think about world building at least in a different way, where I think about kind of like colors, like someone's painting a series of paintings and they're using like greens as their theme, or their theme is this thing. And so when I'm writing a poem, I'm like, how do I invite someone into this world or this perspective, but kind of know what is the color theme? Like is it all spiky, like that jackal poem? Like I thought a lot of like just someone's shoulder blades peeking through their skin and like the spikiness of that and like the bare bonesness of it. And I was like, how can I make this a part of the language that I'm using? And so I think that's a lot of how I try to like think about, what I'm building and what I want to invite people into.
Yeah, I think one other connection that was so clear to me is I heard both of you reading today and sharing your work is finding that spark and that beauty in the simple, in the normal, in the almost mundane sometimes, and how do we shine up that rock and make it sparkle and really give it a new twist. Even, like your love letter to your mom, that poem. We all have written lovely things to moms in cards, right? But what I love is that every person would write that letter differently. And I think that's so interesting. And through that, I found for both of you, you really paint the characters or the subjects of your work in such a beautiful, vivid way. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your character building in your book and how, I know you mentioned it with like, you imagine these backgrounds for them, but as they become more real people, chapter by chapter, as you're writing, Michael, like, do you feel like you know them? Are they your people inside your? I don't know. Tell me more.
So for Mechanics of Yanagua, like, so the lead character is a guy called Ebinimi, who doesn't like people to call him anything other than Ebinimi. So Ebinimi kind of became my friend. Like, I don't drink. If I did socially, I would totally hang out with Ebinimi. Like, he's my guy, like we'd say in Nigeria. So like by writing this and maybe any other book I write for that matter, in the course of writing the book, the characters kind of like live with me. They come into my home. I see them all the time. I'm having conversations with normal people. I'm like, oh no, Ebinimi wouldn't say that. Or at some point, I probably would even just zone everything off and just concentrate on, this thing, I have to finish this thing I'm doing. So that happens to me a lot. Another thing, like, say, for Mechanics of Yanagua, and this was published last year, and I moved into Canada 2019, August of 2019, and this was published in June of 2020. So I wasn't even in Nigeria for all of the buzz that the book generated, and I kind of missed that. And so that was published last year, and then I came into Canada and I started writing another book, and Rain Can Never Know, which will be published in November. And the thing is, for these two books, it was a total departure from everything I knew or I'd learned, I thought I knew, or my regular pattern, because they actually all started as blog posts.
Interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
I love
So
that.
The Mechanics of Inagua was actually something I wrote every other week, and it would be on my website and on my blog. Wow. So the challenging thing with this technique, and I really came to love it, and I did the same thing for Rain. Like, I did it once, will it work again? Is the moment I write that chapter, which is an episode before it became a book, it's out there, right? And so if Ebinimi has a red Toyota in episode 5, I can't change my mind in episode
Yes.
9 and make it a green Toyota. So I'm kind of like stuck. So it was a challenge of, you know what, this writing is out there. How do you continue the story? And I don't know the end from the, like, I didn't know how Mechanics was going to end because my readers shared the journey with me. We went through the process together. And, you know, while writing, they would be angry. They would, you know, want to come back and can't
Get
wait for
feedback
get
from your
feedback, that
readers,
sort of
yeah.
thing. So that was a different technique for me. And I totally enjoyed that process of like having my readers or fans engaged with what I was writing. And for Mechanics, again, like, you know, if you've read it, the second part, there's a character who is introduced in the second part of the book, a female mechanic. So while writing on the blog, I kind of like did like a giveaway. Like I want people to introduce a character, tell me a character, and let me write about that character. And people suggested, and I liked, somebody suggested, Oputari, and she's supposed to be like a female mechanic who comes into the workshop and like, how do I breathe life into someone else's character? And that was really, really challenging for me to do. But at the end of the day, people will come back and say, like, I think I love that girl, you know? and so just being influenced by a name and nothing else.
You don't have much to go on.
Yeah, exactly. And then building it into a story that had already been established, probably had like 25 episodes already. And you bring this character somebody else has mentioned and build it into the story in such a way that it becomes believable and relatable. That was really challenging to do, but I kind of like loved that challenge, and I've enjoyed it. So yeah, the characters, while I'm writing, they stay with me. And with Rain Can Never Know, I started writing when I moved into Canada. I think I would have lost my mind if I didn't meet Rain. Like she kept me company. I couldn't wait to go back home to Rain.
To spend time with her.
Exactly,
yeah.
and continue writing the story. And that's how real it becomes for me.
Wow, I love that you brought up community because, I mean, I've been a part of the spoken word community for a long time here in Saskatoon, just like Dash. And that's something that I really enjoy about the spoken word community, not just in Saskatoon, but in general, because you would go to your weekly open mic or whatever and share a poem and you'd get feedback immediately that night. You might have written the poem that day or a few weeks ago, and maybe based on the feedback you receive from the audience, you end up changing a portion of it. And so it's kind of edited live through community. And so I love that connection with your blog writing and hearing people giving their suggestions and trying to work in those prompts live. Like, I don't know if you have anything else you want to speak to about that, Dash.
Yeah,
So interesting.
I kind of love that. It sounds, I don't know, brave in some ways. You know, like I said, I get overwhelmed when thinking about writing a huge story like that. But to do that in sections and let people have input, the only comparable experience that I think I ever have is on such a smaller scale. Like sometimes I'll freestyle for an audience, you know, where it's sort of like, all right, audience will give me suggestions and I'll craft a poem around it. And I think the interesting thing of sort of like, and again, that's such a smaller scale example, but like, one thing I do love about spoken word is that like once you say it and it's out there, it's gone. Like it's been said now.
It's not just your poem anymore.
Exactly,
it like belongs
yeah.
to the room in some ways.
Yeah, and you invite people into that. And I think people really love it when they actually like, yeah, not just get invited to like step into your world, but also help like move it around and craft it. I think it's really cool.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, you both have this beautiful lyrical quality. I mean, in the dialogue in your work, Michael, I could hear the characters. They were really jumping off the page for me. So when I received this assignment of having you two together in a panel, I was so excited because I really think that your two works, although not necessarily connected by genre, really do speak to how words help us enrich the world around us, and this way of how can I describe something that maybe seems so simple, and yes, the cat is on a mat, but like how can you express how the cat is laying out and stretching and, you know, doing their little bum wiggle to get cozy, and there's so much you can dig into the kinds of stories that you're both working with that I've really enjoyed hearing your words today. Do we have anything from over in YouTube land? Well, your reminder, if you want to ask a question, you have not that much time left. So
Can I ask ask a question?
Yeah, I'd
I was
love to hear
curious
that.
for Michael, since you have the experience of like publishing and putting your works in different spaces around the world. My experience obviously is different, like not being published, but performing in Canada and performing in North Africa, where I grew up. And I've always kind of struggled with like how I write and if I'm writing for an audience or if I just write and then try and see if it fits with the audience. So I'm curious about you. Like, was there any difference to how you wrote like Mechanics of Yenago, like when you were in Nigeria and be released there, and this new one that you're writing now that you've been in Canada? Is there a difference in how you write with the audience contextually, or is it kind of the same process but you just know it'll be released different ways?
Yeah, so that's a good question, Joel. And just so you know, if it's any comfort, because I think you've mentioned it like twice about how challenging it might be to like do like long prose.
Yeah, yeah.
If it's any comfort, when I grow up, when I'm older, I aspire to be a poet. And, I want to
Well, it
do-
all aspire to be you.
I want to do spoken word. So the thing is, yes, I was tempted when I first moved to Canada. When I started Rain, I was like, okay, now you're in Canada. It's possible people would read your book here. You have to go to the library and consume Canadian literature and sound like them and be like them. But I think I met this guy, Bob, who like photographed me for a photo shoot. And then we became friends, and then he read my book. And then he started, started reading my blog and would read the stories. And he would ask me about Nigeria, and he would tell me about the politics of Nigeria and the things going on there, just because he was inspired by my writing. So I said to myself, you know what, there's no point trying to change. Like if this was something, I think like there's a thirst. Because let's face it, we've become really multicultural. And so there's a thirst for more, for newness. And maybe people like us can begin to fill that void. And so if you went to the library, there'll be a section, and hopefully that section will grow where you find world literature and anybody who was interested in anything like that. So yeah, I was really tempted to want to change, to sound more Canadian if that was possible. But at the end of the day, I decided I was going to be true to myself. And just to add that when I finished Rain, got a publisher in Nigeria, got a publishing deal, and it's going to be out in November. And I kind of got bored, which is strange because I have 2 jobs in Canada. So I started writing again, and I just finished another manuscript.
Wow,
And so
look at
this
you.
time I was tempted to and it's called Leave My Bones in Saskatoon. So I was tempted to again sound very Canadian, So I would go to my Canadian friends' homes, and I'll see how they interact with their cats and dogs. I don't.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah, try to learn to do a barbecue in the summer because I wanted all of those elements in the book. And then I was thankful that I attempted it because it then made me feel like, Michael, you're not being real. This is not you. This is not you. If you are going to write a book here, at least for now, stay true to yourself and your identity. And I'm so glad for the opportunity, that the writing community have given me here, because they would read my book and be like, oh no, like I had to pass it on to someone else. So, that made me feel like, what, yeah, just keep being, there's nothing like being authentic. And the thing is like, even being in Canada in the last 2 years I've been here, I realized, what, I have traveled because of work, but I've never lived this long. The longest I've stayed in any country, before I moved here was like 3 days. And by the 3rd or 4th day, I'm already climbing the walls, I can't wait to go back. But now I'm here permanently, and I'm experiencing the country in a different way, right? And I still want to be able to express myself the way I would in Nigeria. And I'm grateful that when I encounter new readers, I see people order or buy my book and they're white and they're Canadian and wherever they're from. it's really fascinating because they've had to go and Google stuff. And I have another friend who, now when we're chatting, we became friends because he discovered my writing, right? And then he would Google, when we're chatting, he would use a Nigerian expression. Like he would text me and say, no wahala. I'm like, where did you get that from?
Well, no one can write like you, right? And same with no one can write poetry like you, Dash. And that's why I get so happy and excited when I hear someone talking about that journey through their discovering their authentic voice and your own perspective. Because even if someone had all the plot points of mechanics of Yanagoa or your poem about Jackal, like we'd all write them differently, right? Because we all come at a story from different perspectives. And that's what I think is so magical about the literary community in general and the writing community, because it is so supportive of encouraging each other to be who we are, but be the best iteration of who that is through our writing. It's really beautiful. And I'm so thankful I've gotten to share this lovely time and conversation with all of you today. Do you have any last questions you want to ask either of each other or bring forward in our little panel before I start our exciting wrap-up situation?
Well, for me, it's not so much a question, but like the emotion. So like I'd listen to a couple of the stuff you read out, and at the end of the day, like it's still the emotions, and those emotions don't change. Mm-hmm. Like no matter where you are, where you're from, your race, nationality, whatever. Like on Mother's Day, I feel those same sentiments towards my mom. I guess I'll just be thrilled, seeing a tree house at the back of my rented apartment and wanting to discover what's in it or what's inspired by it. So I think like I've also come to appreciate more than ever before that emotions, when they're genuine, like they don't have colorations, like there's no gender, like there's nothing,
Just transcends all the
exactly,
boxes.
it transcends all the boxes. And for a writer like me, who kind of like, when I write, I'd like to go to that place, right? So I feel like, well, even if you were, in China or Australia, you would be able to relate with those emotions of loss, of love, of greed, whatever it was. Those are things that would transcend, like you said, and we all share in those.
Yeah, that's sweet. Thank you for that insight.
Anything you want to add before I go all wrap up, Dash?
Oh, should I plug my thing?
If you'd like, I can do it for you, but you can do it for you.
Sure, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I just wanted to throw at the end too, if anyone was interested in my poetry and wants to see some more. Me and another poet from Saskatchewan, Janelle Puapskonius, we're doing a show in Nuit Blanche. So that's next Saturday, September 25th. We're going to be between Picaro and Saigon Roll, just on Avenue A. Starting at 8:30, we'll be doing performances, just talking about the core neighborhood, community care, and what it looks like to grow well together. If anybody's interested, I'd love to see you there.
Great, yes. And you can pick up Michael's book at McNally, other local booksellers like Turning the Tide, as well as not just these two wonderful authors and writers, but all of the folks who've been featured here throughout the festival this weekend. There's so many amazing, talented people here in Saskatchewan and in Saskatoon. I'm just so thankful that we all get to celebrate them this weekend. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us today for this lovely panel about how words live and jump off the page, and how just because we're in a different genre doesn't mean there aren't a lot of connections between the kind of writing that we do. I want to again thank our sponsors, the incredible sponsors that make this event possible: Canada Council for the Arts, Access Copyright Foundation, the Canada Book Fund, Government of Canada, Sask Arts, the City of Saskatoon, Sask Lotteries, the Bank of Montreal, and the Saskatchewan Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services. So I have been Danielle Richardson, your host for today, and thank you so much to Michael and Afenfia.
Correct.
Avencia, and Dash Reimer. Thank you so much for being a part of our panel today. I've really enjoyed spending time with you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
so
for
much
hosting.
for having us and the opportunity.
The pleasure's all mine.